People rarely think about the fruits they eat and the person behind the fruit, that is, whoever did the fruit picking in the field. According to the National Agriculture Workers Survey, 95% of agriculture workers in the United States were born in Mexico, and of these, 52% are undocumented workers. It is estimated by researchers that there are about 1 million indigenous Oaxacans living in the United States. Majority of them are Mixtecs, Zapotecs, and Triquis. Agriculture work in the United States has been segregated according to ethnicity citizenship hierarchy, which explains why undocumented indigenous pickers have continued to be exploited and how this process has become normalized and invisible. The cause of migration of the indigenous southern Mexican campesinos is due to legal and political apparatuses, deregulation of all agricultural trade, like NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement banning economic barriers including that on corn, the primary crop produced by indigenous families in southern Mexico, which forces Mexican farm owners and workers to emigrate for wage labor due to poverty in their native country. The Mexican government was forced to erase tariffs while government subsidies were allowed and increased, enacting an inverse tariff against Mexico corn. Seth Holmes took on an ethnographic research project that would expose how Oaxacan migrant laborers suffered daily. Some became so used to the pain that they could no longer feel it. Through his bodily experiences, Holmes gained insight into the social suffering the Triqui normally experienced. Migration, at times deportation, but ultimately survival. Dry throat and tired legs from running through the deadly Arizona desert after having struggled to reach the border. Cold rain seeping down their necks and bodies through the rain gear provided, sore knees, hips, and backs from bending over all day in the strawberry fields, an aching stomach from stressing over making the minimum weight requirement from the picking job. They experienced tiredness from lack of sleep due to rain leaking, freezing wind, and noises surging through the thin walls of the migrant camp. Stiff necks from living homeless out of a car while traveling from state to state. Oaxacans were of special interest because they recently began migrating to the U.S., were known for being violent, and lived and worked in unhealthy environments. The Triqui who experienced labor migration are understood to have chosen to voluntarily migrate based on economic reasons, but that is not the case. Just as refugees have no other option, they too are left without options because choosing to stay in San Miguel is riskier than crossing the border. According to Holmes, the more indigenous one appears to be, the more suffering one will experience. One man experienced so much psychological mistreatment, he developed a headache that had lasted 7 years and was triggered by insults that he received while picking. The indigenous campesinos, unlike the chilangos, which are light-skinned Mexicans, are not paid by the hour, but are paid by a certain amount per unit of harvested fruit. They have a certain amount they need to pick every day. If they do not pick the required amount twice, they will be fired. The differences between the workers is that the chilangos get treated better and get to live in the nice labor houses. The chilangos do not have a required weight to pick each day in order to keep their jobs. These pickers are allowed to take breaks and can work at whatever pace they choose. Migrant workers have now become real victims of structural violence, which is a form of violence that occurs through a social structure and denies a group of people basic human needs. Within the farm, a hierarchy exists. There is segregation stemming from conjugated oppression. There are many imbalances in power which are derived mainly from race, class, and citizenship. At the top of the farmer food chain are the farm executives. Next are the crop managers. Lower on the food chain are supervisors. Right under supervisors are the administrative assistants. Next on the farmer food chain are the checkers. The duties of supervisors is to walk through the rows of crops and oversee the work of the pickers. They oftentimes will tell the pickers to pick faster. 60 is the approximate number of hourly field workers on the farm. Last on the hierarchy of the farmer food chain are the contract field workers. On the farm, there are approximately 300 contracted field workers. Several small groups of field workers that get paid a minimum hourly wage live in the poor conditions of the labor houses and work 7 days a week from 5 in the morning until the early evening. The farmer executives are mainly made up of the Tanaka brothers and the rest of the executives, Anglo-American professionals who were implemented to keep the farm competitive and successful. The farm management is typically blamed for the poor living and working conditions. The reality of it is that farm management does not have any control over the conditions because big corporations control them. Raising the pay or improving the conditions for the migrant worker would cause the farms to go bankrupt, and this is the fault of large corporations who now have corporatized the vast majority of the U.S. agriculture. The average age of a migrant field worker is about 29. The agricultural workers have a mortality rate 5 times that of all other workers. HIV infections are 3 times more common for migrant workers than the overall U.S. and Mexican populations. Due to tricky migrant workers being placed at the bottom of the hierarchy in the farm worker hierarchical system, they are forced to suffer the most injuries and illnesses. They are mistreated in the fields. Oftentimes, they are charged incorrectly at clinics, given inappropriate medicines, or treated as inferiors who should not question the services that they are provided with. Approximately only 5% of undocumented migrant workers have health insurance. Back in Mexico, there's also a poor healthcare system. When Holmes had visited San Miguel, he was told that there was not a long-term place for him to stay at. The only way he would be able to stay is if he worked in the hospital clinic. Abelino was one of the migrant workers that Holmes helped, and he described how he had a knee injury. He tried to get medical assistance, but his doctor would only tell him to get rest and refused to give him an injection. He then went to a physical therapist in order to try and get back to work and was taught a few exercises to alleviate the pain. He then went back to his doctor, which gave him a form to work that said, while picking, twisted his right knee, which insinuates he is the one at fault for his injury. Migrant workers are being manipulated by being told that anything bad that happens is their fault. This is disturbing because if it leads to multiple workers feeling the same discomfort, then revolts will emerge. Because of the structural violence of the neoliberal international policies, rebel groups in various areas of rural Mexico have risen up demanding work, land, housing, food, health, education, independence, freedom, democracy, justice, and peace. In other words, they are demanding what we in the United States take for granted as our civil rights. Unfortunately, the tricky migrants experience violence from outside as well within their government. If they join the rebel groups and demand change, military groups enact massacres and disappearances of anyone suspected of being involved in these movements. If they migrate to the U.S. in hopes of escaping the brutalities of Mexico, they are deemed as less human and experience social inequalities and symbolic violence that have injurious effects on the bodies similar to the violence they would experience back home. Because there are approximately 1 million indigenous Mexicans in the United States, it is our duty to understand fully why these people continue to migrate and to eliminate the stereotypes and perceptions of migrant laborers whose suffering is normalized.